Thanks, Councillor Law. We can see you, can hear you, and you can hear us. Councillor O'Callaghan, you're next on my screen.
All clear, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Darren Howe.
I can hear everybody and see everybody, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alan McFarlane.
All good, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Darryl White.
All good, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. Councillor Dale Harriman.
Yep, can see and hear everybody, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sharon Gibson.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
And Councillor Graham Middlemas.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Can see all and can hear all.
Thank you very much. No order of preference there, councillors. That was the way it ran down my screen. Mr Stephen Piacenti, CEO, can you see and hear us?
Okay, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. So if I could just ask once again for the governance team to flick me over as an organiser of the meeting, so I can control the. I can't. You're all live up. Got you now. Thank you very much. Very much. So, item. I'll just run through some of the housekeeping. We are live streaming, and as per our local law 1, it will be going out. If you have any concerns with the recordings, our speakers this evening will also be seen and heard. So when there's public participation time, they will join us in this virtual meeting, and this meeting will be broadcast live, and it will also be recorded as a part of our local law 1. We say that no person can operate or a recording device of our meeting without first seeking the consent of the chair or the CEO. No one so far has asked for that to happen, and so we presume that no one is recording our meeting apart from us, who will be broadcasting that to YouTube. Item 3 on our agenda this evening is the apologies, and as we've just done a quick whip around, I can see that there are no apologies this evening. Everyone is present. Item 4 is the declarations of interest. If any councillors have a declaration of interest on any item in this evening's agenda, they can make that known now or at the time. But we can record those if councillors want, if anyone has a declaration of interest. Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. On item 17.3, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest on that particular matter. Thank you. Close association.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other councillors have a declaration of interest to note? No. Thank you. We move to the adoptions of the previous minutes of the council meeting, which was held on the 4th of May 2020. Councillor Middlemas, I can see you give me a wave there as someone who's moving those minutes. And Councillor McFarlane, I see you're seconding. Thank you. Any councillor wish to speak to that, for or against those minutes? No. All right. They will pass then. Thank you. There's no speakers, then they will just pass the adoption of the minutes of the meeting. Thank you very much. Item 6 on our agenda this evening, councillors, is the acknowledgements. This is an opportunity for councillors who may wish to raise a formal acknowledgement to our community in congratulations or condolence. Councillor Gibson, I note you.
Look, I'd like to do an acknowledgement for Jazz Shelley. Now, her and her family used to live here in Newborough for a number of years. Now, she's won the Victorian Junior Female Athlete of the Year, and she won it earlier this year, and I was going to bring it up last meeting, but I was an apology. Now, this is really exceptional to me because not only has she won it this time, she also won it in 2017. So to win it once is really outstanding, but to win it twice. Now, Jazz, for those who don't know, she's a young lady, well, young for us. She's a 20-year-old who has played basketball since she was 5. Her mum coached her up until under 12s, and she actually is now playing college basketball over in the US. She is here at the moment, but with all what's going down, but that's where she plays. Now she has a really great basketball pedigree, for want of a better way to put it. Her grandparents have been refs and quite high up in the ref field for decades. Her father, Phil, a lot would know Phil Shelley. He played for Gippsland Lakers. Now, so did her mum. Her mum played for Hayfield for over 10 years, and she also played for a year with Gippsland Pacers. So, you know, she comes from a really great family, a basketballing family, and she's had some great coaches, local coaches, but has gone on to do bigger and better things, but it started here. So I would like to just acknowledge her and what she's achieved so far and look forward to seeing what she achieves in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors who wish to make an acknowledgement? No? All right, thank you very much, Councillor Gibson, for your acknowledgement. Jazz, we move now to item 7, which is our public participation time. Now, this is where the community can be involved, and as normally would be, we would be in a room together and the community can come to the lectern and address us, or send through a question through to the CEO for addressing as well. Mr. CEO, I'll just check, there are no questions this evening that have been put forward?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. There's no questions received as of midday today.
Thank you. So there are no questions that have been put in writing, so the CEO doesn't have to address anything there. But we do have an opportunity for public speakers, and the speakers are able to speak to any item on the agenda in the ordinary council meeting for the monthly meeting. And we have, of course, made that the facility available to them in 2 methods while we're meeting online. One is by pre-recorded video, and the second is to join our meeting with us in this environment. We've got 2 speakers this evening, and they have both doing both of those things. So the first speaker is going to speak to us via a video that's been pre-recorded, which we will play, and then Mr. Swarrick will be online for us to ask any questions of that video presentation. So if I just stand by for a second, we'll just make sure that we're able to get our speakers into the meeting in a technical sense, and we'll be able to ensure that they are joining us before we can play that video and then ask any questions. All right. So, hello, Michael. How are you going? It's Dan Clancy here, the Mayor. We can see you, and I'll just unmute your microphone, or you can do that if you want.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Thanks for having me here.
Good to see you. And it seems that you're at work very late on a Monday evening, unless that's a very impressive lounge room that you've got. So
I did duck down to the office and got a bit of preparation work done for tomorrow, so all good.
Well done. There's silver lining there. So what we're going to do now, Michael, is that we'll play the video that you've pre-sent us, and the councillors are able to watch that, and then we'll ask the councillors if they have any questions of that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us. All right, if we could play that video, thank you, team.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, is there meant to be audio with this clip?
Not sure. Michael, is there? Yeah, there is meant to be audio, is there?
It is meant to be audio and a voiceover on that, yes.
All right. Well,
I'm sorry, I don't want to make it trouble for it, but I'm not
No.
getting any audio at all.
nor am I. I figured it was just pictures. So thanks, Councillor Middles. We'll let the IT staff have a go at seeing whether they can take presuming they've got a feed from that computer that's playing the audio.
There we go.
All right. Thank you. We'll go back to the start and play it again. So thanks very much, Councillor Middles.
Hello, Mayor Clancy, councillors and guests. My name is Janelle Swarrick and the footage you are viewing shows a block of land on 221 K Street, Traralgon and the surrounding area. My husband Michael and I entered into a contract to purchase the land in November last year. The blocks currently have small and restrictive building envelopes of less than 350 square metres to build a house on. However, the blocks are a large 2,000 square metres each in size. Our understanding as to why the building envelopes exist is due to the land being earmarked for future development and potential subdivision into 8 smaller lots. It is our wish and intention to build our family home on the block. We have 3 boys who would love to have a big backyard. It is our belief that the home we intend to build fits in with the existing bigger lots and rural feel of the area. We have spoken to residents in the K Street, Alamir Drive vicinity, and they have expressed their support in having the building envelopes removed. They have concerns and strongly oppose the land being split into smaller lots in the future, commenting that this would have a negative impact on the area. We would really appreciate your assistance and support in having the building envelopes removed so we can build our family home. We are most grateful for your time and thank you for considering our application.
Thanks. Thanks very much to the IT people who've played that for us to make sure. So, councillors, he could hear that okay? Just a nod. Yeah, thank you. Great, excellent. And Michael, we've got you on the line. I think there are some questions. Councillor Gibson, you have a question for Michael?
Thank you. Yes, I do. So 2 questions, please. One is, Michael, could you please tell us roughly what size the blocks are around you? And the second one is, would you be happy for a permit to be done, but you would have to actually adhere to all the normal permit conditions of a normal development anyway? Would you be happy with that? And what size?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. The size of the land around the area, the majority of the blocks on both Alamir Drive, the majority of the land down there are 1 acre to 2 acre lots. The land basically next door where you could see the houses in the properties are 1 acre lots, across the road are 1 acre lots. So pretty much a couple hundred metres up and down K Street that way are all 1 acre lots. There is a couple of half acre, at least 1 half acre lot, the same size of the land that we're looking at here, that was a 1 acre lot that was split into 2 two 2,000 square metre lots, exactly what we were trying to do. It's literally next door to that land. So we're basically just trying to do what they've been doing. To answer the second question on a building permit, I guess it does depend on what what gets lifted in terms of the building envelopes, but happy to obviously go through the right process when we do eventually want to build and build to what we need to with the permits. I guess the critical thing is the envelopes.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Middlemas, your microphone's live now.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Swarrick, when you purchased the land, I just noted that you'd only purchased in the last year or so. Were you made aware of the existing conditions of the building envelopes? Were you told about those when you purchased it?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. We had signed we had contracts prepared, and we had the Section 32 and plans presented to us, which we reviewed, presented to our solicitors. It was basically we're about ready to sign them, and our solicitor gave us a call and made us aware of these. So in the first instance, no. So when we were negotiating, looking at the land, doing title searches, that wasn't on any of the searches. Prior to signing the contract with the conditions that we can work through with council that had the building envelopes removed, we were then made aware of the envelopes. So not at first, but during the process we were.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Swarrick? No? All right, thanks, councillors. Michael, I think we've done now, unless you've got anything else you wanted to add, but I think that you've used the technology well, and we certainly appreciate that this is different to what we would normally do. It's a learning for us. We're learning as we're going, and a video submission certainly showed what you were hoping to achieve. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Cheers.
All right. Thanks very much for popping in. We'll say goodbye to Michael now. He's gone. And thanks, councillors, for that feedback around the audio as well. Our next speaker is Mr. David McLaren, who's speaking on item 14.2. We'll just wait for Mr. McLaren to come into the meeting. As such, see here is Mr. McLaren. Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. I'm well, thank you, Mayor.
It's good to see you. We welcome you to this format, and I know that you've had many conversations with the councillors over the last month or so. So we're across this, but we're really keen to hear from you. And you're speaking to item 14.2. As I discussed with you this afternoon, it's a 3-minute window to speak, and then councillors can ask questions where you can elaborate and clarify. So are you right to go?
Yes, I believe so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And you can see and hear all of us, which is good.
I can, thank you. Yes.
Great. All right. Well, we'll start your 3 minutes when you're ready to go.
Sure. Thank you. I'll start. Good evening, councillors. I've spoken with each of you previously about some of the matters in this application, and you've all received a number of community submissions on the matter. They encourage you to all take this opportunity to support small businesses, jobs and health services in the Latrobe Valley by not imposing unnecessary red tape. I'd like to point out the strongly supportive submissions made by my 2 adjacent neighbours. As previously discussed, the planning scheme allows for durable surfaces other than an all-weather seal to be used for car parks. The vehicle crossings policy, section 8.d, states that crushed rock and gravel are 2 of the acceptable options. A significant percentage of car parks in the Latrobe City are surfaced with crushed rock or gravel. The heritage issue has been addressed, and I draw your attention to Planning Practice Note 91, page 11, which I've mentioned in my emails previously, regarding heritage overlays in neighbourhood residential zones as minors. It makes the important point that it's important to understand the difference between neighbourhood character and heritage. The heritage overlay should be used when the objective is to conserve the existing building or buildings. The heritage overlay has different objectives from the neighbourhood character overlay and is not intended to operate as neighbourhood character control. The issues raised in the Heritage Advice Commission by Council are not heritage issues per se and should not be given undue precedence or to be used to prevent my car park from being undertaken as detailed in the plan. Councillors should not preference gardens over jobs and health services. The reduction in car parking spaces demanded under the guise of heritage and the consequent termination of one of the health practitioners due to inadequate parking is so clearly against the public interest that I will not labour the point further. With the addition of more last-minute conditions, there are other matters yet to cover relating to the landscaping conditions and infrastructure conditions proposed on the agenda. The car park as it exists using crushed rock has increased the stormwater runoff from my property by just 3.6% compared to previous levels. You can check the figures in my email from this morning. This is easily handled by the existing drainage as shown in my environmental management plan. If the car park is to be concreted, this would increase stormwater runoff by 46.2% compared to before. This creates the problem that leads to the requirement for increased stormwater systems found in 11.A and B, conditions 11A and B. Environmental management plan has been already submitted to address the drainage issues, and in early discussions with the engineering department, I was assured that hydraulic engineering would not be required. To install a stormwater retention system capable of handling a 1 in 100-year flood is unreasonable. Permanent landscaping controls on my property are counterproductive. For example, the mature magnolia in the front of the property is planted directly on top of the gas and water lines. It will be initially retained and included on the vegetation plan, but must eventually be removed and not placed when it dies. I would propose a 24-month establishment period for gardens where they're maintained according to the plan is more than reasonable. In conclusion, I trust councillors can see that this application has been pulled into a vortex of regulation where planning staff have imposed regulations of dubious merit, which then fall like dominoes to create yet more and more restrictive conditions. I urge the council to take a proactive stance to support our business and the health services we provide in the Valley. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thanks very much, Mr. McLaren, and you did very well on the timing. Excellent. So we will throw it open to the councillors to ask you any questions that they may have, which you can address in each as we go. Councillor Sharon Gibson has the first question.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, David. Can I just ask you, with the concerns that the objectors have raised, what compromises have you made to address those, please?
Could I ask, were there particular concerns you were referring to? There were a few different ones, I'm sorry.
Yep, well, there is a number of them. And what have you done to address any of those concerns, please?
Okay. So I've provided, well, a lot of the concerns seem to be around the initial lack of amenity in the property, the concern over the heritage of the property being compromised during the process where I was removing the pool and making a big mess. And I've since installed very neat and tidy gardens that you know, I feel soften the appearance quite well. So the amenity I've worked hard to try to restore and enhance. It was actually quite run down prior to my buying the property. The issues over car parking, one of the main issues that local residents raised was over car parking, that they didn't want it spilling over into the street, and I've endeavoured to, and I'm striving hard to provide all the parking on site. I'm just trying to rack my brain as to the other exact concerns.
Right, one of the main ones is the heritage. Now, yes. A lot are not happy with how the heritage has, in their opinion, has been taken away, and not happy with just nominal garden setup that you're looking at. So how have you addressed that, or no, that hasn't really been addressed?
Oh, well, I would beg to differ. The heritage, as I mentioned in that little statement I made, the heritage applies to the property, to the infrastructure, the buildings on it. There are no heritage controls on the property with regard to landscaping or gardens at all. I have preserved the property, the infrastructure on it to the best of my ability. It'll be maintained and enhanced. I'm working towards replacing the roof, replacing the damaged weatherboards, all of that to preserve the building for the future. So I feel I have actually addressed the concern on heritage. I can accept that they have concerns over the amenity of the property and the appearance of it, and certainly during the time when they were complaining, there was work being undertaken to remove the concrete in-ground pool, which did make quite a mess. And before I'd installed the gardens, it did look pretty barren, but that has been rectified, rehabilitated, planted with gardens to the maximum extent allowed, with the providing the correct car parking.
No worries. Mr. Mayor, can I ask one more, please?
Yes, you can, Councillor.
Thank you. The other question is, you can actually go through the planning scheme and do it all legally. What's stopping you from doing that?
Well, my concern as trying to be a responsible neighbour to prevent the overflow of car parking onto the surrounding streets. Curran Street, which is the side street that we're on, is quite narrow. There are sometimes problems with people parking along that street and forcing, cars to have to wait for one another. And as one of the main concerns and potential safety issues that was raised by the neighbours, I felt that was a high priority. That's one of the things that prevents me from seeking to reduce the parking. It also potentially reduces the future utility of the practice as the building as a medical practice, in reducing the ability to utilise it to its potential for practitioners. The resistance that was generated when I was providing the car parking on site, I feel would be even higher from the neighbours if I was to not provide parking on site. And that's been made clear to me in discussion with the neighbours, and I believe also in the council's discussions with the neighbours as they've reported them to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Any other councillors have any questions for Mr. McLaren? Councillor Harriman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. McLaren, I know you sent a letter in to the officers, which I think all the councillors have seen, where you indicated you'd be happy to increase the plantings. I think it was, and I haven't got it on me, unfortunately, some potted plants along the western side of the building, and some more plants through the building. If an application that allowed 4 practitioners got up, would you be happy to put that into practice, that offer of more plants into practice?
Yes, indeed. Thanks for the question, Councillor Harriman. Yes, I've provided to the councillors already, as you'd be aware, hopefully a couple of alternatives to increase the gardens and to further soften the appearance of the car park, as was one of the concerns. Yes, I am quite happy to implement those. Yes, that's something I'm willing to do. The reason I'm prevented from putting the garden bed along the strip between the house and car park is because of those gas and water lines that I mentioned previously. That's where they run. I can't plant things deep into the soil there as you would with the garden. So that's why I've selected the potted approach, the large tub approach.
Yep. And just one more, if I can, Mr. Mayor. Yep. David, you mentioned there changing the, I think it's 0.8 to add in for a 24-month period, which is the landscaping shown on the endorsed plans must be maintained to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, including any dead, diseased or damaged plants that are to be replaced. Now, you did mention that there is one plant that you're worried about that is actually over the gas and telecom lines and shouldn't have been planted there. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. There is a magnolia adjacent to the exit of my the driveway near the front of the property, fairly close to the gas and water meters there, or the water meter there, and it's planted directly over the lines. And I can't rip it out at risk of damaging those lines. So the plan is that when it dies or is diseased, that it be cut off at ground level and not replaced. So as I mentioned in my submission, that would be a problem with regard to those conditions that are proposed. And I'm suggesting that a 24-month period would be, would give my commitment to establishing the gardens that are preferred by council, but without being an unnecessary restriction going forward to the normal management of the property.
Yep. No worries. Thanks for that, David. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Other councillors, are there any other councillors who wish to ask Mr. McLaren a question in regards to his presentation? No? Councillor O'Callaghan, yes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some questions for Mr. McLaren and one subsequent to Councillor Gibson's, if I may. But just to start off, Mr. McLaren, can you confirm that the work in relation to the car park has already been undertaken?
Yes, Councillor O'Callaghan, I can do that. It has been. That was based off the initial advice that I received from the planning department when I first engaged with them. I asked which planning permits that would be required, and I was told that there was a permit required for the signage and for the usage of the driveway out the front onto the main road, as it's a Vic Roads road. And I was not told at the time that a permit was to include the car park. The car park I knew had to be submitted in a plan. I had to show that I was providing the right parking, but I queried and I was under the impression that I was not required to have a permit to actually install the car park, but just had to provide the evidence that I'd provided it, basically.
Thank you, Mr. McLaren. I guess my question was more to the point that do you think the officers also understood the scale of the car park, and that may have led to the misunderstanding in relation to whether or not a permit was required for that detail of the work?
No, Councillor, I provided plans. I showed them diagrams and plans of what it was. So they had the information there. Yeah, I can't account for that. The only thing is that up until about the 22nd, 23rd of January, the permit was listed as signage and access to the road. And then subsequent to that point, when a different planner took over, the parking was included as an element of the planning permit. That was the first I knew of the change that actually required the permit.
Thank you. If I may continue, Mr. Mayor, I had a subsequent question to Councillor Gibson's questions put earlier.
Yes,
you were talking about the work in advance of the permit, which is, that's not disputed. And also happy further down the track, Mr. Mayor, perhaps the General Manager may be able to respond to the information available to the officers via email in advance of those outlines of parking requirements and the scale. But I'm just wondering, to Councillor Gibson's question, in having that larger scale car park in advance of the permit, was that to overcome some of the concerns in relation to those potential objections? Off those roads?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure the question. If I was putting it in advance to try and avoid the scrutiny, no, I wasn't.
But to try and overcome the issues that had already arisen that Councillor Gibson was speaking to try and ameliorate some of the concerns that the residents have and get that parking off-site. Was that the intention of doing that in advance of that permit application?
No, sorry. It was always my intention to provide the full amount of parking on site. I'd read the planning scheme 52.06, and it stipulates that I need 14 car parks for a medical clinic with 4 practitioners. So that's what I intended to do, and it fit on this property with some room left for gardens, of course. So that was always the initial plan.
Thank you, Mr. McLaren. Just a final one, Mr. Mayor, in relation to the commentary in relation to heritage requirements, I just wanted to seek some clarification. It may come from the General Manager via the CEO later in the meeting, so happy for it to be taken as a question or notice if that's preferable. My understanding was heritage requirements apply to the whole property. not just to the building, but I do understand that this is particularly complex. So that's always been my understanding of it. So I just wanted to have that confirmed. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. I know Mr. McLaren had referred to the gardens not necessarily being heritage related in terms of that overlay, but my understanding it's the property in the entirety, hence the triggering of the heritage with the application of the permit. So if I could just perhaps, Mr. Mayor, ask for some clarification on that point. And just
we could jot that down. Sorry, Councillor Callaghan. I think the CEO is jotting that down to seek some clarification, because I believe that the difference between a facade heritage, which is the front of a building, versus a heritage overlay is a little bit different. But we'll get the CEO to address that.
And completely acknowledge it's complex. I've owned a heritage property myself in the past, and I understand completely that it's difficult. And having said that, having purchased one in the past, were you aware when you purchased the property, Mr. McLaren, that this was actually a heritage-related property space building?
Yes, Councillor, I was. I knew that the Heritage Overlay 85 applied to it, which I did look into, and I looked at the issues around tree removal, tree controls as applied under the Heritage Overlay, fence controls, paint controls, all of those various elements that can be applied via a Heritage Overlay, and they were all absent. And I read the Heritage statement, which stipulated that the importance of the property was its architectural significance as an example of the time period that it was built, which of course I've, as I said, preserved the property fully intact and intend to continue to rehabilitate it, which was, yes, my understanding of what the requirements were.
Thank you, Mr. McLaren. I understand that was a number of questions, and I did bounce back to Councillor Gibson's for a subsequent. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing further.
Thanks, Councillor Callaghan. And thanks very much, Mr. McLaren, for elaborating on that. Councillor Howe, you've got a question. You've got two questions. There you go.
Okay, thanks, Mr. McLaren. Just two quick questions. You're practicing there at the moment, sir?
That is correct, Councillor, yes. We unfortunately were faced with the prospect when the delays occurred in council planning, the planning delays that we were faced with, that it was either shut the business or commence use of our property, which we understand is certainly that we certainly didn't want to have to do that, but it was either the business or to take that step, unfortunately. So yes, we are currently practicing from here. There was advice given subsequent to that that because of the attempts we're making in terms of bringing it into compliance, that there wouldn't be compliance action taken against us at the time, which basically was said we were able to continue as things were pending the permits.
Thanks. So how many practitioners are on site at the moment, sir?
Well, there are 4 that work here. There's a couple that have shut down from COVID due to their own regulations, but there are 4 engaged here.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Any other councillors wish to ask Mr. McLaren a question? Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my question is really in regard to the, and just remind me, or perhaps of the number of clients or patients that would be flowing through the place on a daily basis on an average.
Thanks for the question. It is a little difficult to estimate at this time. Several of the practitioners are only part-time, and several of them, or 2 of them are closed for the moment, but on an average day, you might have 30, I would estimate. It's, I suppose, not the current volume of practice that I am concerned about, with relation to the car parking. We're all growing our practices. We're all relatively new businesses, and we would like to maintain the scope for that growth in the practice. So the current needs don't, I suppose, practically require the 14 car parks, but it's fully intended that they will be utilised.
Thanks, Councillor White. I think you've got what you're after there. Mr. McLaren, I just might ask a subsequent question to Councillor White. Just, and I know that it is hard when you haven't got everyone up and running, but are they generally, through the practitioners that you have there, are they 15-minute appointments, half-hour appointments, 8-minute appointments? What sort of turnover are we seeing?
Yeah, so the appointments range between, I believe, 10 minutes for the shortest ones through to 1 hour and a half for some of the other practitioners. So they are quite a variation of time.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Which is clearly why it's hard to calculate exactly how many you'd have, because it varies from practice to practice. Any other questions, councillors? No, I think it's all silent there. So thanks very much, Mr. McLaren. Thanks very much for your presentation and for taking those questions. Thank you for being a part of the online system. We're sorry we couldn't do that, but restrictions that we're all facing at the moment, we're adapting as we go, and it's really good to have you being able to join us in this way, so you can put your thoughts forward on this item 14.2 for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good on you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks very much. We will say goodbye, Mr. McLaren and Mr. McLaren, and continue on with our meeting. So I can see 9 councillors and a CEO now. So this is back to our normal practice. There at 8 in our agenda, items held over for reports. There's nothing that we need to deal with this evening, and we're moving straight on to 9, which is notices of motion. Notices of motion are submitted to the agenda before it's published, and so we have one notice of motion at 9.1. And people that are following along at home can see that on the screen as well. 9.1. The copy I have has Councillor McFarlane's name on it. Councillor McFarlane, do you wish to move this? Hand raised there. So Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder? Councillor Darren Howe is seconding. I need to move over to my minute book and get my pencil sharpened. Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Howe. Is there any opposition to this notice of motion? No opposition registered. Councillor McFarlane, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our current local law requires any notice of motion to be lodged with the CEO on the Wednesday morning prior to the Monday council meeting. And whilst it's every councillor's right to propose a notice of motion through this process, my observation is that when such a proposal is identified in a forum of the councillor group, then we have a couple of benefits. One of the benefits is there are no surprises, with all councillors aware of it, of the proposal and the background behind it, and also that the councillor group can add value to the proposal by some sort of discussion which allows us to move forward. With the requirement for council to have new rules in place by the 1st of September 2020, and that's yet to be resolved, and to satisfy the new Local Government Act, and of course with the council elections coming up in October, I believe that that a practice to outline any motion proposed, say 5 business days before the council meeting, which generally would align with a councillor briefing session on the Monday prior to the council meeting, I believe that will improve our process, it promotes good governance and aligns with our councillor code of conduct. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Howe, you were the seconder on this. Would you like to speak to this?
Oh, just briefly, just to say, I think this is a terrific idea. It has a lot of merit. It adds more transparency to our process, and it will make it a more thorough process that we go through. I'm personally, I need that extra 2 days to consider everything in the agenda anyway. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Always find yourself a little bit more reading time is good, I see. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this notice of motion, either for or against? They can just speak to it. No, no other councillor? No, I'm giving you a bit extra time just in case there's video lag, but I don't think there is. Councillor McFarlane, would you like to close the debate?
Well, just briefly, Mr. Mayor, and I think, again, I've only been in this forum for the last 3.5 years, and I've certainly witnessed those times that we have discussion on proposals ultimately end up in good outcomes when we've all had the opportunity to have a comment, to add some value, and probably more importantly, to be aware of the background behind any proposal. So I just believe it's a bit of a practice that would be worth us trying over the next number of months. It may well be something that we consider looking at putting in the governance rules that will come in beyond September. But I think it's a practice worth having a trial at. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. As we have had speakers, councillors, we need to put this to the vote, and I will call the votes as I see them and through my minute book. Those in favour of this, please raise your hand. And as I can see, all hands are currently raised. That is unanimous. So I won't call out your individual names, but I think we can see that clearly has passed unanimously. So thank you very much for that. And we've got through our first item where we had to vote and could see each other. Items referred to this council at 10 is nil, correspondence is nil at 11, 12 is nil, and 13 in our agenda, there are no reports there as well. So we're moving straight to 14, from 9 to 14, and the first section in 14, which is the Regional City Growth and Investment section, is 14.1, which is to amend the planning permit 201813. And I see Councillor Gibson is waving, and Councillor Harriman as well. I'm sorry, I was looking down.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was looking to move the alt that I asked for.
Yes, there's an alternate one to this. There it is on the screen at the moment. This has been circulated as well, I believe. Is that right?
It has.
Yep, right. So, councillors, I'll just check that everyone's had an opportunity. I know that this was sent last week, I believe, so people have had time to. Does anyone need a moment to read it? Knowing that this is an alternate motion that's gone up, besides the one that was provided. Oh, people happy? Do I have a seconder for this? Councillor Harriman? Yeah. Councillor Harriman, sorry, Councillor Howe. Councillor Harriman beat you to that one.
Happy to second the motion. Yep.
Thank you. Any opposition? Oh. Excuse me. That wasn't my phone ringing. That was Councillor McFarlane's 3-minute talking. So you, I was putting a timer on there as well. So my apologies. So mover in the alternate, and Councillor Gibson, Councillor Harriman, second. I do have any opposition to this alternate that's gone up? Yep, Councillor McFarlane and Councillor Middlemas. Thank you. So Councillor Gibson, I'll give you an opportunity as the mover to speak to this now, to the alternate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I understand about the reasons behind it, the planning staff actually putting a different motion up. I understand that completely. But if you look at what is actually around this site, and that was one of the questions I asked, what are the size of the blocks around you? And his answer was 1 to 2 acres. So yes, we're looking at the areas and transitioning with the Traralgon, with the density and everything else. I get that, but if you look at that area, most of those blocks are all large blocks, and I don't know about you, but I know if I bought a block, and bearing in mind he didn't know at the time when he was first purchasing the block, but if I bought a block, I would want to be able to put the house where I want it. I wouldn't want to put it right at the side, so I'm right on the neighbour. So to me, it's common sense to have this. I think it was, I understand why the 173s were in place in the first place, but actually I don't believe it really sits with this type of area, with this development, because most of the other sites are large. And if you look at the actual, now he sent out photos. Now, a lot of those houses are not right on the side, which is what is proposed here. So, look, I think it's writing something that should be righted, but I will listen to my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Harriman, as a seconder, an opportunity to speak now.
I'll reserve if I can. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely, you can. Does any other councillor wish to speak either for or against, in opposition? So Councillor Howe, I see you. Councillor McFarlane, I see you, and Councillor Middlemas, and I'll go in that order. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've jumped around a fair bit on this issue. I thought I'd have my mind made up. I'll drive around there and have another look, drive back, think about it, change my mind, drive back, have another look at it. The way I look at it is, and I understand why the envelopes were there. We need to for developers to want to develop it, they need to have density to be able to put in infrastructure, to put in lighting, to put in footpaths, put in drains, etc. But when every other block in the street is large blocks, they're 1,000 square metre blocks, 2,000 square metre blocks along K Street both to the west and to the east. They're 1,000, 1,500 square metre blocks. You're not going to have, they break them up in the way they were talking, to 500 square metre blocks. You're not going to have 500 square metre blocks in the middle of all these larger blocks. I just don't think that it makes sense, as Councillor Gibson said. So if there was a way that we could move the envelope to be able to break them into 1,000 square metre blocks, maybe that was an option, but I couldn't see how they can do that either. So I'm happy to support this alternate motion.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Councillor McFarlane noted you, and then Councillor Middlemas. So Councillor McFarlane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, my concern is that these two blocks in question are located in the growth corridor, which will allow for future higher density residential. We can't look historically at what might have happened 5 or 10 or whatever years ago, but I do understand that there are a few building envelopes surrounding this site, and that could be perhaps a question I'll ask for our General Manager when I finish. And I'm aware of other locations in our city, and one that comes to mind is a subdivision that went through some years ago on Crinigan Road West, which is now Alice Street in Moore, and the same practice was applied to that, so that when the time come for that area to become the higher density residential, then there was no impediments. It concerns me that by removing these envelopes, the future viability of this potential residential land will be compromised. I know there's some demand for 2,000 odd square metre allotments, but ultimately these size blocks in a higher density residential zone will only impede future development. In relation to the comment about not being aware, I'm not quite sure. The way I took the answer to the question from the proponent before was that the contracts perhaps are still not signed. I am really surprised in 2020 that anyone would sign or that a solicitor or a conveyance would allow anyone to sign a contract where very clearly the plan of subdivision shows there's a building envelope. So if someone has purchased this property without that sort of advice, then I believe they have some retribution against their lawyer or their conveyancer. But Mr. Mayor, I think it's just a principle. And look, if we start saying what has been, we will continue on, we will never be able to develop Traralgon to that side of Traralgon to accommodate what our future residential needs are. So somewhere we've got to make the line and say, this is what it's got to be. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor McFarlane. You mentioned when you were speaking there you had a question. Was that something that you wanted to address at the end when you said?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. It was a question. Am I right in saying that some of the surrounding properties to these two blocks do have some building envelopes on them? That's perhaps one thing.
CEO, is that something that we're able to?
I'll just ask it. My general manager is popped onto the screen. Gal, Yep,
Councillor McFarlane is correct in that assertion.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor McFarlane? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. CEO. Thanks, Mr. Scott. Councillor Middlemas, you raised your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a bit like Councillor Howe. I've mulled over this one for quite some time. I had a discussion mid-afternoon in which I thought, nah, it's okay. But the more I think about it, if I can give a little bit of history, quite some years ago now, might be 6, 7 years ago, this council resolved that Traralgon West was to be the future expansion, or one of the future expansion parts for Traralgon, and that we would allow subdivision. The land is mainly in 5-acre lots, some 2, 1, the type of lot we're looking at now, and that we would allow subdivision in an orderly fashion of that whole precinct there. Now, in defence of the impatience of people around that area, I can understand that council has yet to put out its idea and its planning, and this is what it'll look like. But the council policy is very strong. The zoning is very strong. That is to become an area for closer living. Now, the envelopes are put on those blocks so that you put your house there, it'll allow the rest of the block to be subdivided sometime in the future for closer housing. So if we approve this, we are saying, well, that's our policy, but we'll allow it to be a bit changed, a bit moved. And I accept that council has not put their plans out strongly enough. I know there's been some discussion on where the drainage would be in the area, the whole lot of those things, but it's not very transparent. If you've got a block of land in that area, you still can't see where we're going. But let's make it very clear, it has been rezoned, it can be subdivided, it's up to council to come up with that subdivision proposal. But if we allow this, we are going to end up, I suspect, with a couple of great big blocks in the middle of a closer residential area. It's no use making these policies if we sit down and go, well, you know, this person bought the thing in good faith or didn't research it properly, we'll let them do it. It's either our policy, and we break our policy, we have to have a very good reason to do so. And I suspect in this case, if we're looking at the future of Traralgon, and the future of Traralgon is, as defined by this council, subdivision of Traralgon West, I think if we grant this, we are actually destroying that policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Middlemas. Any other councillor wish to speak either for or against this alternate motion? Councillor O'Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All of my colleagues have made perfectly valid points in relation to this. I would have to say that Traralgon West would have to be the messiest planning area that we currently have in terms of timing, ongoing difficulty, challenges even in terms of how we've dealt with this in the past, in terms of bringing some of this to community to have conversations and engagement. Councillor Middlemiss has clearly alluded to the level of confusion that may exist in relation to this, even in relation to the Traralgon West Development Policy from 2011. There's ongoing review and consideration in relation to that work now. You know, there's still some conjecture around how that sits and what works best. The nature of those things and those reviews will then provide an opportunity for community to give us a fully considered perspective on what they see needs to happen in those spaces. And I would not be surprised, further to speak to Councillor Howe's consideration, that there is a significant level of consideration around that larger block. It's a terribly irregular block. It doesn't just sit in an easily subdivided space. So I think even with the fullness of time, I don't think bringing it to market is going to see it developed in the way that's considered in that current outline. I do also pick up on Councillor McFarlane's point in relation to full disclosure and irregularity in terms of not being made fully aware by either the sale of the property or conveyancer in relation to this. This is fairly common information that is provided in relation to those kinds of contracts, and it should have been available. But on balance, there's also that consideration of what our intentions will be, what the community would like to see happen, and the fact that even from a council perspective, it has taken us a long time to get to the point to be very clear on Traralgon West, and there are still matters that are yet to be fully explored in a level of detail that can provide clarity to the community. That is not the fault of the officers, and I want to be very, very clear on this. It is not because of a lack of willingness on their part to bring that to us. Councils past and perhaps present, we've had some conversations, and that sits very firmly with us. So I think this is one of these circumstances where we are almost complicit in terms of timing and capacity and pace in relation to this. It is not ideal. I do not like setting precedent, but given the shape of the block, the proximity to the CBD and the other elements of information that we have available to us, and the lack of objection from the community, as council, we are the only current objector in relation to this, which doesn't occur in relation to other matters we will consider this evening. I think with the fullness of consideration, this is a reasonable request. It is unusual, but reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor O'Callaghan. Any other councillor wish to speak? No, so Councillor Harriman, you reserved your right to speak as the seconder. You can.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can, I just follow on a couple of points that, as Councillor O'Callaghan raised, the Traralgon West policy or plan of 2011 is actually not in step with our current policy. The policy in 2011 was for 500 square metre blocks, which works out to over 15 lots per hectare. The current Live Work Latrobe policy that this council accepted sets a limit of 11 lots or up to 11 lots per hectare, no more. So the proposal to subdivide it actually runs counter to a policy that's been approved by this council. So we're saying that we want up to 11 lots per hectare, which sets an average lot size of 715 square metres. So this actually runs counter to that because it refers to an outdated policy. It also, I know we're talking about extending Traralgon in that way. This council has on many occasions had discussions where we've said we want the high density development to take place in and around the CBD and the larger blocks to be retained on the outskirts of the town. This is on the outskirts of Traralgon. It's in Traralgon West. The neighbourhood character is large blocks. They have all of a similar, bigger or similar size, and it fits the character of that area. To divide it up into small 500 square metre lots would go right against the character of the area as well as Live Work Latrobe. So I'm fully supportive of this on the grounds that it also doesn't make sense that if you have a large block and if you have a look at where they've got the two building envelopes, that the houses are going to sit on top of each other as they would in somewhere like Narre Warren or Pakenham or, God help us, the western suburbs of Melbourne, the new estates out Melton Way, where it's just gutter to gutter. And that's very, very similar to what's on this building envelope. It's not what you want in a regional city. It's not what you want when you come for a tree change to the country. And I believe that the idea of a building envelope, while it might have made sense in 2011, doesn't make sense with what this council and some of the discussions this council has had in the meantime. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. No one else has indicated the need to speak unless they want to, but we'll move to Councillor Gibson now, who was the mover, to close.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I take on board some of the different points that have been raised, but if you actually listen to, well, hang on, we've got policies that are contradicting one another. And as Councillor Harriman stated, we have stated time and time again with our policies, with our planning issues, you have the high density around your CBD. So this is, and we're addressing other matters tonight in planning, and it's about neighbourhood character, heritage overlay. So if you're looking at that for one, why aren't you looking at it for both? So neighbourhood character are large blocks. It's not your CBD. It is going against our policy that's in place now. We have put so much time and effort into Live Work Latrobe, and this is against that policy. So yes, I take on board what one of our councillors was saying about people should have been fully informed, but for goodness sake, look at the minefield that we've got to go through. The policies are contradicting one another, and this gentleman is to suffer for that? I don't think so. I don't think that's fair and reasonable. So that's why I'm moving this alt. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Now the debate's closed, we need to put that to the vote. So we have in front of us the alternate motion that Councillor Gibson's put to us. Those in favour? Councillor Gibson, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman and myself. Those against? Councillor Middlemas and Councillor McFarlane. That motion, the alternate motion has passed. Thank you very much, councillors. As mentioned before, Councillor Harriman, I see you waving to me, but I'd sent an email out a little bit earlier on around we're going to ask our General Manager through the CEO to just give us a quick officer's report on 14.2. So our next item is 14.2, which we've had our presentation to through public participation time with Mr. McLaren. And what we thought I might do is ask the CEO for a quick report on this application to how we've got to where we are at the moment, because there was much discussion about it and been much community interest in it as well. Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a question Councillor O'Callaghan asked earlier just about whether the heritage overlay applies to the whole site, the extent of, or just the dwelling. So I can confirm that it does apply to the entire site, not just the dwelling. There were some other points raised in that. I'll hand to Ms. Gatt to respond to in terms of the more detail around the application itself. There were some questions around that, and also to give a summary of the application. So I'll hand over to Ms. Gatt. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. CEO and Mr. Mayor. Tonight, Council is being asked to consider a permit application to develop land at 43 Shakespeare Street, Traralgon. The development consists of a car park associated with a medical centre, alteration of access to a road in road zone category 1, and the display of business identification signage. Council should be aware that the application is retrospective, as the car park has already been constructed and access to Shakespeare Street has been altered. The applicant has been operating for some time from the site and constructed the car park several months ago. Our records show that officers provided advice back in August last year that a permit would be required for construction of a car park. Advice given as recorded in our inquiry system identifies that a planning permit would be required for any external works due to the site being located within the heritage overlay. I believe the car park was constructed following this advice. In regard to the sealing of the car park, the Latrobe planning scheme requires car parks at commercial sites to be treated to an all-weather seal to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Following advertising of the application, 3 objections were received, and issues raised included concerns regarding heritage values, traffic, car parking, access, pollution and stormwater. As the property in its entirety is covered by a heritage overlay, officers sought advice from Council's independent heritage advisor, who advised that the construction of the car park has diminished the heritage value of the site as the established domestic garden has been cleared from the Shakespeare Street frontage. The heritage advisor recommended that a number of car parking spaces should be deleted from this frontage and replaced with suitable landscaping to help restore those heritage values and comply with the planning scheme. Therefore, officers' recommendation to this report is to issue a notice of decision to grant a permit with conditions that require this extra landscaping to be done and help restore the heritage values of the site. As a result of this extra landscaping, reduction of car parking spaces provided on the subject land does, however, subsequently require a reduction in the number of practitioners that could legally operate from the site in accordance with parking requirements in the planning scheme. 4 practitioners operating from the site with only 11 car spaces is not consistent with the planning scheme, so this would need to be reduced to 3 practitioners. On balance, weighing up the provisions of the planning scheme, including the need to respect the heritage values of the site, the concerns of the objectors, while supporting the medical centre to continue to operate, officers have provided before you their recommendation. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks very much, Ms. Gatt. For a brief move, Councillor Gibson, is it a question that you have? Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of questions or to clarify things, please. It was stated that the crushed rock is there and it's actually addressing the stormwater better than what it would if it was concrete or whatever. But what I read this afternoon from the officers, it was different to that. So could you please clarify about that? And the second question is, okay, if the applicant wished to go through the purpose of having 4 practitioners, they could do that, but they would have to actually go through a planning scheme, not a planning scheme, they would actually have to go through a permit like everybody else does. Is that what you're saying, please?
We'll pass that one over to you, Ms. Gatt.
Yep. So in relation to the second part of the question, the applicant can apply to amend the permit so that he can have 4 practitioners, which would require a reduction in car parking, and he can apply to amend the permit along those lines. The permit would need to be re-advertised though. Okay.
Right, that's to the second part. Did you have a, yeah?
Sorry about that, just getting some engineering advice there, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
There are certainly different considerations in terms of runoff, whether you're considering a sealed car park or crushed rock. And on balance, the engineers believe that a sealed car park is better in this instance.
May I ask why? Is it because of the stormwater, or is it because in summer it's really dusty for the neighbours? Would you know why, please?
Those concerns. Just getting that advice now, Councillor Gibson.
Yes. The advice, Councillor Gibson, is that in terms of maintenance and the wear and tear on a car park at a commercial site, the ceiling would stand up better if it was a sealed car park rather than crushed rock.
Okay, thank you. That's addressed your questions, Councillor Gibson. Councillor O'Callaghan, do you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, just a question for Ms. Gatt, our GM, if I can. So just that point of clarification. So some of these things can be overcome by going through a process and re-advertising and allowing for that matter to be fully considered, as would be our usual process for any other application of this nature. So in some ways, it's the retrospectivity that's getting us a little caught up.
Yep, I guess that's correct. There is a process that Mr. McLaren can take to sort of meet the outcome that he's looking for.
And just one more, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, I may have had a sound drop out very briefly. That in August, did you say the officers advised that the planning permit would be required for any external works due to the site being located on a heritage overlay?
Yes, Councillor O'Callaghan, that's what our records show. That's recorded in our pathways system as being provided in August, on the 1st of August 2019.
And that related to the car parking as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan. I just would say Councillor Harriman has put his hand up, so I presume he's wanting to move this, but I just want to see if there's any other questions while we have our General Manager, Ms. Gatt, on the line. No, okay, thank you, councillors. Councillor Harriman, you were giving me a wave there, so I presume you weren't asking a question, you were wanting to move that.
If I could move an alternate, Mr. Mayor, that was sent out.
Yes.
There was one more little change on it, which came up tonight with the dead plants, which relates to point 8. If we can scroll down to point 8, which includes the landscaping shown on the endorsed plan must be maintained to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, and it's in there as for a period of 24 months. That just goes with the plant out the front that's actually causing the magnolia, I think it is, causing dramas with the water and the telecom lines, which may be forcibly removed. We thought if we could get it for 24 months and let the other plants grow up, that might solve that problem.
All right. It says in that point 8 there, Councillor Harriman, including any dead, disease, damaged plants to be replaced, but we noted through Mr. McLaren's presentation to us that he didn't have any intention of replacing that tree, but more cut it off at the stump because the roots were into the gas pipes. Yeah, that's part of that for 24 months. So he's happy to maintain that tree for 24 months, but then if it becomes diseased or dies, which is within the lifespan, it's not expected to last 5 or 10 years, that after 2 years he can, if it dies or is diseased or damaged, that it can be cut off at ground level because it can't be removed, and not have to replace it, because then that would again endanger or put at risk the water main and the telecommunication line. Just might need to just clarify that, because that point there says that he would need to replace it.
The 24 months he would have to, yes. So that's the change that the planners came up with for me, that they believed fitted it, which was for a period of 24 months. That if it's dead or injured or dies within 24 months, then it has to be replaced. But after that time, after that period of time, it wouldn't need to be. So he has to maintain it for 24 months at least. But after that time, if it does die or becomes diseased, then it's not replaced.
Okay. All right. Just seeking that clarity. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. No worries.
That's the small change, councillors, that was in the alternate motion that was emailed around late last week. Point 8 says about that tree. Thanks, Councillor Harriman. We'll have you as a mover to an alternate motion to 14.2. Do we have a seconder? Councillor McFarlane, I caught you first. Sorry, Councillor White. Quicker than you, he was, sorry. Councillor McFarlane, we have you as a seconder. So, Councillor Harriman. Councillor McFarlane, any opposition? All right, there's opposition shown. All right, so Councillor Harriman, I'll get you to speak to this motion now, now that we've done with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason I put up the alternate for 4 is the area in question along Shakespeare Street is actually designated as an area for medical facilities such as this. And one of the points that I'd like to make is that 2 houses down the street in Shakespeare Street is another medical practitioner. Now, a lot of the objections have come because that medical practice does not have adequate on-site car parking, and the cars are actually using Shakespeare Street and in some cases Curran Street. And this is what's caused a lot of the objections, and looking at a lot of the objections, they've been on the grounds that people didn't want parking in Curran Street and they saw that as a problem. So from where I'm sitting, I understand putting all the car parks on site is actually a benefit and a safety feature. So for me, that's an absolute positive. I also we talk about the character of the area. Within 80 metres, there's already 3 other medical practices operating out of older houses and heritage style houses in the area. And coming into that area, as Councillor O'Callaghan pointed out a while ago, you're going past 2 brightly lit, high visibility service stations that
Point of order,
green.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor O'Callaghan. I thought it was, yep.
I think Councillor Harriman can probably retract that and
I
walk
will
it back.
retract
I
that.
think to actually have the Mayor intervene. I think Councillor Harriman is quite aware of what's just happened.
I just realised what I've said, Councillor O'Callaghan, and I apologise fully and retract what I've said.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I was on a mute when that came on as well. So, Councillor
My
Harriman.
apologies. No, my apologies to Councillor O'Callaghan, Mr. Mayor. But in the area, there is industrial and commercial properties close by the site, which does detract from what could be called the character of the area. And as I said, it's been approved. It's part of an area, part of our plan. That area is actually to be developed, particularly for medical practices. That's what the gentleman is doing, the proponent. I understand where council officers would say that the 3 is the preferred amount because we need to preserve the heritage overlay of the area. Having seen that site before the proponent took over, it was an absolute mess, and the heritage value of the garden had been lost. I understand the proponent is prepared and has made the offer to officers to actually put more plants in an attempt, which I believe is satisfactory, to actually improve the visual amenity of the site and more in character with a heritage overlay. With regards to the car park, it is within our council guidelines and planning guidelines that crushed rock is acceptable. We've used it at other sites, and I don't see a problem if we have it in our planning overlay or in our planning guidelines that it is an acceptable product to use, then it should be used. We can't pick and choose where and when and what we want. If we don't want it in there, then it needs to be stated in the planning that it can be used only on the application to officers, and that it must be concrete or asphalt otherwise. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No worries. Councillor Harriman, I had my hand up because you were at time and we don't have a bell in this environment, so I do apologise for that. Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, Councillor O'Callaghan.
The question, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Harriman alluded to the medical area or precinct as in dedicated. Could we take that as a question to the CEO or the GM? My understanding is it's not actually a designated area. It's just something that's sort of becoming organic. It's not a formally recognised area or medical precinct.
Thanks, Councillor O'Callaghan. Mr. CEO, did you want to address that now?
Going to suggest, Mr. Mayor, I might need some advice from my General Manager again on that one, specific questions. Ms. Katz, has joined us.
Yep, Mr. CEO, that area is a mixed use zone. That's not specific to medical centres or medical practices. It allows for a range of commercial/residential developments.
Thank you. Councillor O'Callaghan, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It does. Appreciate the clarification from Ms. Gatt.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, I'll just note, councillors, as a part of the new laws that we have through the state government, the legislation that was passed, that we need to have all councillors present. I believe that Councillor Gibson is still with us, just with the camera turned off at the moment. So we just need to.
No, it's not.
Rosen,
The call.
Sorry.
Okay, so while if a councillor has a technical issue, which it seems to be at the moment, what we do need to do is just suspend the meeting until all councillors can be present. Because if we can't see each other and we can't hear each other and we can't be heard, we just need to put a little break in. So we need to make sure that Councillor Gibson can be seen and heard.
I can see and hear everybody. I don't know if you can see and hear me.
So we just, yeah, we can hear you, but we can't see you, which would make it hard for voting or impossible for voting. So we just need to get your technical stuff going.
Okay. I'll turn the camera on and off.
There we are.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's just one of those procedures we need to have. So Councillor Gibson, you are back with us. Councillor Middlemas has just left for a second, and Councillor O'Callaghan is just gone for a second as well. So we just have to wait until everyone's back in. And then we're moving forward with this. We're going to you, Councillor McFarlane, unless there's any other questions. Councillor Harrington, did you have something?
I was just going to say, Mr. Mayor, with a 1.5 hours in, would a 5-minute pause be approved until the other councillors came back?
Yeah, I'm reticent to, while we're in the middle of the debate.
Middle of it, yep. No, that's fine, Mr. Mayor.
Maybe at the end of this item. Councillors, I'm just going to turn my camera off for a second while I reach down and get something I've dropped below my desk. So excuse me.
You don't have that piano nearby, Mr Mayor?
So I know that this, for people who might be watching at home, this is not overly interesting watching 9 people sit on a screen and not say anything. But for those at home, it's worthwhile noting that the laws that we have say that we need to have all councillors present, and we pause the meeting until then. So I think if I just do a quick count, I think we are all here. Yeah, all councillors are present at the moment. So we'll continue the debate night. Thank you for the suggestion that we could take a break, but I am reluctant to do that during the middle of an item. So we'll move. Councillor McFarlane, you were the seconder on this.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I certainly have a bit of a dilemma tonight, like I suppose a few of my colleagues have in relation to some of these planning issues. Whilst generally I'm supportive of planning logic and support those recommendations that come forward, in inspecting this site, I just saw some other things that I feel, in expressing my own judgment, which is what this process is about, that really aligned with most of what Councillor Harriman's proposed in his amendment. The first one I make comment on is the flat block. It's an extremely flat block, and I believe that any washout of the compacted material there is most unlikely as compared to certainly a sloping block. And looking at least one house that I saw in Curran Street, they have a similar situation. There appeared to be no concerns on the footpath. My greatest concern in that area is the traffic, and I was actually quite amazed. I hadn't been up Shakespeare Street for a while, so when I drove into Curran Street, which is certainly very narrow, and you wouldn't want additional cars parking in there, it took me forever to get out onto Shakespeare Street. No, I was just concerned with the amenity of the area created by the nature of that road. So I think parking on the site is certainly a high priority given Shakespeare Street as it is. And in looking at even the heritage value of the surrounds, I questioned in my mind how Shakespeare Street and the nature of that environment stacked up, certainly differently to a leafy green street with some lovely old homes in it. The other issue is in relation to landscape, and over time, and I've seen it around here over many years, where landscaping requirements are put on planning permits, and a year or two down the track, everything's going along, so things just get left. So I think the fact that the proponent gave some indication, and I believe some opportunity through Councillor Harriman's amendment to talk about those landscape requirements. I think the proposal that I saw come through a couple of weeks ago went some way to addressing the landscape. So they're just the concerns that make my judgment, albeit blurry, is that I just think that the traffic and the surrounds are the issue that needs to be the major consideration, not necessarily the landscape, the surface of the parking areas, and the fact that both the immediate neighbours have also not indicated any concern. That's got to be balanced, I know, with the other objections that have come in. I have finished, Councillor Clancy. Mr Mayor, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. It is hard without a bell, so thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Any other speakers for or against this alternate motion that's been put forward? Councillor Gibson, Councillor Middlemas, did you give a wave as well? Yep, okay, so Councillor Gibson, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Howe, I've got those in order now. Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I share Councillor McFarlane's angst on this planning issue. the part, a few points. I'm not against the practice at all. They can have a practice, that's fine. I'm not against that at all. What I am against is if you're told something and you don't do it. Now, I have a concern that we were just informed different information. One is that they didn't know about the permit, and the other was our officers having logged that no, it was in August that they were informed they had to have planning permits. That really concerns me, because what is to stop anybody who wants to have a build anything, say didn't know, and try and get it retrospectively? That truly concerns me. And if I'm not wrong, if this motion, the original motion, got up, there is nothing to stop them keeping the 4 practitioners in employment, doing the work until the actual permit gets decided. Now, I'm happy for the officers to correct me or not on that point, but if I remember correctly from them, that is the case. So there's nothing to stop them doing what they're doing, but they just go through the proper process that everybody's to go through. So we're not making them any different to what everybody else has to do. We've got right through Victoria, you have a planning scheme amendment, or a planning scheme, sorry, that you have to adhere to, and they're the same as everybody else. They need to adhere to it. So I'm sorry, I really have a concern with that, and that's why I opposed.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Middlemas. Sorry, I'll press that button. There we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief. The area in which this application occurs is called the Traralgon Railway Residential Heritage Precinct. Whether councillors can't see the heritage, but they can see the service stations, whether they can see the traffic or not, it is in a heritage precinct. We would have to take action to cancel that. It's there and it impacts on the planning decision around this case. Now, it's in a mixed use zone, which means in a heritage precinct, a business can be operated as long as the, shall I say, the sanctity of the heritage precinct is maintained. In other words, if it's a consulting room that's in a house which is landscaped in the same fashion as the heritage precinct. This case we're looking at is where the business is effectively too big for the heritage precinct. The officers came up with a recommendation which would allow 3 practitioners and would meet all the heritage requirements. The proponent wants 4 at all costs, and from what we can see, and councillors should have a close look at page 52 of their agenda, where all the heritage requirements are set out there in great detail. What this proposal does is diminishes the heritage precinct. Now, that's the key to this issue. It's meant to be a historical or heritage precinct. It's a business that must fit in with that heritage precinct, not alter it. And the problem with the car parking can easily be solved by downsizing to what the officers recommend, which would fit the heritage precinct. Now, let's go to some of the other things that have been put to us as councillors. First one is that we are impacting, pushing aside, crushing small business. Have a look at the zoning map of Traralgon. Have a look at the vacant buildings in Traralgon. There is ample opportunity for small business other than in the heritage precinct if they don't fit that site. And as far as the term nitpicking has been used regularly against the council planning staff, the council planning staff have been following the planning scheme and acting very appropriately. It's insulting to see them here described as nitpicking. In a nutshell, this business is too big to fit into the heritage zone. The answer is to shrink it back and restore the heritage value of the area. We've just had an application which we've approved, which moves. Let's ignore our planning. Here we go again. It's the wrong place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Minimus. Right on the buzzer. No need to give you a wave there. Thank you very much. Councillor Howe, you had indicated a wish to speak, either for or against.
Again, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ms. Gatt and the planning team for all the work and effort they've put into this motion. There's been many hours, many emails and discussions I had on the matter. Planning isn't an easy thing. They've got state legislation, they've got overlays, they've got our planning scheme, we've worked with Latrobe, they've got to try and please the proponent, they've got to try and please the complainants. Not an easy job. And they get knocked too much. So before I start, I'll just thank them for all their effort on this. Okay, now moving on to the issue. Councillor Harriman indicated that it's near a residential area. I think that's pretty relevant as the property is in an heritage overlay. Whether there's an industrial area nearby doesn't really come into the equation. He's also brought up the previous owner didn't like gardening. Same thing, whether people like gardening or not, it's still irrelevant to the fact that this property is in a heritage overlay. He purchased the property and he knew he needed a planning permit to do the works to the garden and to the car park when he established the car park, and he chose not to get that. He did the works without the appropriate planning permit. He now wants us to change our rules or standards to fit what he wants. I applaud Mr. McLaren for opening a medical centre and providing employment and providing medical services to the residents of Latrobe City. We all do, and we all hope he does well. But he must abide by the rules of the council and of the overlay. My preference is to support the original motion of having the garden re-established so it complies with the Heritage Advisor's recommendations. And just on that wasn't what our planners decided. We got experts in, as we always do. If we need expertise, we call on our partners, we call on the CFA, we call on DELT, Regional Roads. We're not experts in everything. We take advice from the experts. And our Heritage Advisor recommended that 3 car parks get removed and the gardens get re-established. So I'm happy for the original motion. If Mr. McLaren wishes to go back and apply for a new planning permit with reduced parking, back to 11, have the 4 practitioners, more than happy to look at that on its merits if that comes towards us. According to our traffic engineers here at Council, there's more than enough street parking on Curran and Shakespeare Street to compensate for the loss of 3 car parks. So if that does proceed in the future, happy to look at that. That's about all I've got to say on the matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Are there any other councillors that wish to speak to this? Councillor Howe, you talked about the original motion that you'd like to look at that. I'm just wondering, I'm just seeking some advice whether that needs to be foreshadowed or whether that just automatically reverts back in the event. Mr. CEO, can I just ask you that question?
Yes, so it is traditionally it is better if it's foreshadowed rather than. So if this motion were to fail, I'd then have to ask that you reconsider the matter either at this meeting or a future meeting.
Right, okay, no worries. Councillor Howard talked about, the original motion. I just wondered whether that needed to be formally foreshadowed or automatically reverts to what, the officer's recommendation.
So no, you're right. It is best to foreshadow. Otherwise, I need to ask the council to consider the matter either at this meeting or a future meeting. So it is best to foreshadow the intention.
So can I foreshadow the original motion?
Yeah, thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak to this? Councillor Harriman, as the mover, you get an opportunity to close.
Yeah, look, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and keep it brief. I think we've had a fairly full-on discussion about it. I think it comes down to the application went in. The proponent obviously thought it was taking too much time, needed to get a return on his business, started operating. I understand he has not followed all the rules, but we've seen that happen numerous times before. I think what's important here to understand is the application for 4 practitioners, if we use on-street car parking, will be supported by the officers, or from what I've heard the officers say, I would suspect it would be supported. My concern is that the on-street car parking is going to be in Curran Street or Shakespeare Street. There's a bus stop right out the front. It is going to be unsafe. And I think it comes down to, yes, we have to understand the heritage of it. I think the proponents made a damn good effort to maintain and improve the heritage value on what it was when he bought the property. He's continuing to upgrade the building with new roofs and replaced worn out and rotted weatherboards. Has attempted to maintain the value of the property. So for me, it comes down to, do we want on-street car parking in Curran Street where there isn't room? Do we want on-street car parking in Shakespeare Street where it's not going to be safe? And my view is no. I think the better option is to allow on-site car parking at the actual address. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman, for closing that debate. Now that we have debated it and we have had speakers for or against, we need to put this alternate motion that's been put forward to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Harriman and Councillor McFarlane. All those against? Councillor Law, Councillor O'Callaghan, Councillor Howe, Councillor White, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson and myself. So that alternate motion has failed. Councillor Howe had talked about foreshadowing in his speaking. Councillor Howe, is that something that you wanted to do? Or Councillor Gibson, I see you waving at me.
Yes, so I'd like to move the original motion, please.
All right, moving the original, and Councillor Gibson, were you seconding, were you? Okay, all right, so thank you for that. It's just the technology flag. Councillor Howe, you are moving this as the officer's recommendation in the agenda, and Councillor Gibson is seconding. Any opposition? No opposition. Councillor Howe, would you like to speak?
No, not really. I think everything's been said on this, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson, did you wish to speak to this? Councillor Gibson, we just seem to have a little problem with your microphone. Are we able to check that? Because we just do need to make sure, even though I can see you saying no, you don't wish to speak, I just need to be able to hear. Test, test, test. So your microphone is live, it says. You've got a green there, but we can't hear. Might get you to pop up to the little wheel thing, and this is the exact sort of thing that we don't want to happen, is losing councillors' ability to speak to motions. Just you'll need to just press the button that says in computer audio, unless you've got your headphones plugged in.
Sorry. Oh, I'll see this.
There it is. Now we can hear. Yeah, your microphone is working. It's just, there was just a bit of lag there, so it has come through now. Just to confirm that you don't wish to speak to this as a seconder. Thank you. As there's no speakers to this and no opposition indicated, we would pass this original officer's recommendation at 14.2 as passed unanimously. As suggested, councillors, we will take a break now. So we'll have a 5-minute or 10-minute recess as we have been going a few hours now and with the delay. So we'll come back at 5 minutes past 9. Councillor Middlemas.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if, as this one is enormous, an extensive report, I wonder if we might get an officer report beforehand, just to say the calming words that whilst it is a rearrangement, a large report, nothing changes. No hidden souths.
All right. We can certainly get an officer report. I'll ask the CEO for that.
Thanks.
Thanks. Everyone's present. Thank you. So we're moving along with the agenda. Thanks, councillors, for taking the break. We're moving to 14.3. Mr. CEO, we're just wondering if we may be able to get an officer's report from the General Manager for Regional City Growth and Investment on this.
Certainly, I hope Ms. Gatt was listening to that. Able to step in at this point.
Hopefully, yeah.
She is. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Gatt.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This report, I guess, provides a new structure for the planning scheme. The planning policy framework's a new structure which is intended to improve the operation of all planning schemes, to align state and local policy into a three-tier structure of state, regional and local policy. In the main, the translation is policy neutral, as the report indicates. It's really just a matter of reorganisation of the different clauses under that state, regional and local, those headings. And largely anything that may be removed has only been repeated elsewhere or has been dealt with via another policy or another clause. And there's no zone changes or any overlay changes or anything of that nature with this amendment.
Thank you very much for that report. Councillors, any questions before we seek to have a mover and a seconder? Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Gatt. You're off the hook. Thank you for that quick report. That's great. Do I have a mover for 14.3? Jumping Councillor Middlemas, I saw you first. Councillor White, I saw you second. Any opposition? Councillor Middlemas. Sorry, press the button. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't even going to speak because all I would do is repeat what Ms. Gatt has just reported. This is a reorganisation, shall we say, streamlining, cleaning up anomalies, etc. As Ms. Gatt said, there are no changes to our planning scheme. There's no hidden hooks or broken glass in this one. It's a very straightforward, almost, I would call it, administrative function. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor White as a seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, in support of the comments that have been made by our manager and also by Councillor Middlemas, and I suppose for me the important point to mention here is that the final draft did go through a review with the smart planning group and to make sure it was consistent with the new format that is required. And so I think that the other thing to say is it does include updated versions of the structure plans, framework plans, and other plans, so that they're in a representative form that is more user friendly and is is consistent in their formatting. So I think that whilst it's a very big report, it's a very important document that we really do need to make sure is reflecting the aspirations of our municipality and a community, and but also it's a document that is much more, if you like, user friendly for the administration within our organisation as well to be able to work from.
Thank you, Councillor White. Any other speakers for or against? No. No other speakers. Councillor Middlemas, did you wish to close?
Can I say that Ms. Gatt and Councillor White have covered it admirably? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Middlemas. We have had speakers, so we do need to put it to the vote. So all those in favour of this 14.3? Can see all hands at once. That is unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. 14.3. We move to 15.1 on our agenda, which is the Councillor McFarlane, I can see you, CEO delegation to award 2020-21 road rehabilitation program contracts. Councillor McFarlane, I saw you. I saw another hand while I was reading that. Councillor Howe, thank you very much. As a seconder, any opposition to this? Councillor McFarlane, did you wish to speak to this?
I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Howe, did you wish to speak to this? No. All right. Any other councillor wish to speak? No. No opposition. So we've had no opposition, no speakers. That was carried unanimously at 15.1. Thank you, councillors. 15.2 is a curbside collection service policy. Do I have a mover? Councillor Harriman, I know you. Councillor Gibson as a seconder. Any opposition to this? Councillor Harriman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify what this is actually doing and maybe explain why we're moving the review of the curbside collection policy. What this does is actually give the CEO the opportunity that where there's been mistakes made in charges, previously only the ratepayer only had 12 months in which to lodge a formal application with the CEO to review that. This opens it up. The CEO can actually go back in time and actually review it over a number of years. We've had some cases where, unfortunately, as does happen, charges have changed and we've overcharged somebody. This gives the CEO the opportunity to actually go back in time and review it and to repay those charges so that we have a fair and equitable system. So it's all about honesty, transparency, and allowing the CEO to make fair decisions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harriman. Councillor Gibson, you were the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of issues. In this policy, it also revises what's classed as additional services. Now, as we know, not everybody's the same. There are some people who need additional services because of their circumstances at home, whether it be medical or otherwise, and now they're able to have additional services, and that's addressed a hell of a lot better than it was. And that, yeah. The other one is there's a reduced time frame for commercial properties that are left vacant. It used to be 2 years, now it's 1 year, and that is actually similar to what Councillor Harriman was stating, but there's been issues in the past with property owners who haven't known, and this has gone on for a period of time, and then they've found out that there's a huge bill at the end of it. Whereas if it's 12 months, it's a lot quicker and a lot cheaper to pull it up and sort it out. So this addresses that type of thing so that the property owner isn't left with a huge bill that they knew nothing about. So I'm really happy that that's being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gibson. Any other councillor wish to speak either for or against this policy? Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One important change that I don't think has been mentioned is that our garbage charges will now be itemised on the rates bill. So if you're getting you've got one of each bin, it'll be listed there. So there's the chance of overcharging in the future will be a lot less. So again, we're trying to make things easy, more transparent for our community.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Any other councillor wish to speak either for or against this policy? This motion? No. Councillor Harriman, you are the mover. You have an option to close.
I think it's all been said, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. As we've had speakers, we do need to put it to the vote. So all those in favour? Very clear. All hands are up. Thank you very much. That is carried unanimously. 15-2. We move to 16-1. Thank you, Councillor Gibson. This is for community health and wellbeing area for managing camping at Lake Narracan Foreshore Reserve. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's an alt that was sent around previously for everybody to digest, and that's it in front of us. And I'd like to move that, please.
All right. So everyone's had a chance to see that alternate motion as it came through in plenty of time. If anyone needs more time to read it, or is everyone happy? We have a mover. We have a seconder for this. Councillor Law as a seconder. Councillor Gibson. Councillor Law. Any opposition to the alternate motion that's been put before us? No, Councillor Gibson, then you are the mover, you are the speaker.
Thank you. Look, this is really clearing it up a bit because the original motion had a date that had been and gone, so that couldn't really go forward, and the reason for that was it should have come before us earlier, but because of what's gone down, it was late getting to it, so that's okay. This has been clarified. Now, in this, it also is addressing that we have our local laws, and our local law states that it's illegal to camp there and fires. So we need to get the information about what and how, because unfortunately there are people who are coming from all different areas, which is lovely, but it's not so lovely when they come and camp and they leave all manner of rubbish, including rubbish that should be in the toilet, for everybody else who lives here to actually have to either get cleaned up with ratepayers' money, or if you're down there trying to use the area, you have to go around. So to do a proper plan for this area, you need all the information. So there is a security patrol on, and it's not for the whole year, of course, because people don't camp there the whole year. It's normally public holidays and the summer months for school holidays. So that's basically the time it is. And so the security patrol comes through, make sure that the people are informed if they didn't know what the local laws are, but they're also collecting the information that we can utilise to actually have a proper plan to ensure that we can make this area, Lake Narracan, which to me is the jewel in our crown, we can make it the best area possible and utilise it the best way possible for not just our residents, but also for visitors alike. So that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Law, as a seconder, you have an opportunity to talk now.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As my fellow councillor has just pointed out, the critical part about this is really trying to collect some usable data about the usage of Lake Narracan, because at the end of the day, we're not 100% certain what's going to happen with Hazelwood Pondage. And if we're going to elevate Lake Narracan to another level, we really need to start collecting data now. And I think this is a critical point, that we're just really trying to get the all that in force now, just in case of what may or may not happen out at Hazelwood. So it's just probably trying to be better prepared for some relevant decisions down the track. So I fully endorse it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Law. Any other councillor wish to speak to the alternate motion that's been put before us? No. Other councillors? Councillor Gibson, do you wish to close?
Just really quickly, what this is what my fellow councillor and I are alluding to. It's being strategic, getting the information to be strategic on how we utilise this area. So without the information, you can't do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we have had speakers, we need to put this to the vote, councillors. So for the alternate motion that's been put before us at 16.1, all those in favour?
Mr. Mayor, can I just clarify just something, Mr. Mayor?
So, Councillor White, we can't clarify or take a question once the debate is closed.
Can you explain to me the word contactor?
It's an amendment that needs to be in there, is it? Is there a typo, is it?
Typo, that's all.
All right, so in the alternate motion, contactor, so we can fix that amendment up as a little typo. We can certainly do that. I think the full intent is there. So thank you very much, Councillor White. We'll no change in debate at all on your addition of a letter. So we're putting that to the vote. All those in favour? All right, so we have all hands present. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Thank you, Councillor White, for grabbing that one. Moving over to 17.1, which is the council plan for organisational performance. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Gibson moving. Have a seconder? Councillor White. Councillor Gibson. Tick. Any opposition at all? Councillor Gibson, do you wish to speak to this?
Just really quickly, Mr. Mayor, look, as we all know, when we started the council term, we go through a council plan and we set in place what we are trying to do for the 4 years. But each year, by law, we have to look and see if it is to be reviewed or not. Now, no, we're not reviewing it, or we have reviewed it, but we're not changing it, because all the time and effort we put in from the start and each year we've deemed that no, we had it right. It's always been about looking at what is the best for our community. Number one on that list has been jobs, and it still is jobs. So we're not changing it. And also to make a point that, well, come October, you're going to have a new council anyway, so they will set what they deem is right for the next 4 years. So we're not changing things now. We believe that jobs is number one on our list, and leaving it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor White, did you wish to speak to this?
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, just to follow on from Councillor Gibson, the council plan, as we know it, was as Councillor Gibson did say, was developed at the outset of the journey of this particular council, and came up with 7 key objectives, and for those objectives, a number of indicators have been identified, and I think that we're still focused on those objectives going forward. And like Councillor Gibson said, and I'm sure I speak all other councillors will be on the same page in this regard. Fundamentally, it's been about jobs and economic development, but also the delivery of a range of community services that are directly respond to the needs of our community. So I think that the document that I want, the other thing to say about the document is not a big document. It's something that's readable, and our community members should have a look at it.
Thank you, Councillor White. Any other
Thank you.
councillors wish to speak to this? No. Councillor Gibson, do you wish to close?
No, thank you.
Okay. As we have had two speakers, we do need to put it to the vote. All those in favour? It's a unanimous show of hands. Thank you very much, councillors. We move to 17.2, my apologies, the review of the instrument of delegation to the Chief Executive Officer. 17.2, Councillor McFarlane, I note you waiting there. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Law, thank you very much. Councillor McFarlane and Law, any opposition to this? Councillor McFarlane, do you wish to speak?
Very briefly, Mr. Mayor, this review of delegation is just as a requirement of the new Local Government Act, and it updates the process in light of that new act. So, yeah, it's again fairly procedural process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Law, did you wish to speak? No, we can see that head shaking. Thank you very much. Any other councillor wish to speak to this? 17.2. No other councillor. Councillor McFarlane, did you wish to close the debate on yourself at all?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. We have had speakers, so we do need to put it to the vote as a procedural motion. Those in favour? Thank you very much, councillors. That has been carried unanimously as well. We're at 17.3. And early in the meeting, Councillor White, you noted that you had an interest in this. Do you want me to dismiss you from the meeting and have an officer contact you? You can do that.
Thank you.
Right. So Councillor White has officially left the meeting now. That's 17.3, which is the annual sponsorship program. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Howe, Councillor McFarlane, Councillor McFarlane, did you wave as well? Councillor Howe as a mover, Councillor McFarlane as a seconder. Any opposition? No. Councillor Howe, did you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, this is part of an ongoing sponsorship arrangement we have with Latrobe City Energy Basketball. The 2019 year is the final year of a 3-year agreement we had. So what we're doing, it was allocated in the budget for this year. So all we're doing is fulfilling the obligations that we made under the contract. Everything else pretty much speaks for itself. We're allocating 12,283.50 of it to the Latrobe City Energy Basketball debtors account, and the balance to repay an outstanding balance associated with return unused funds from the 18 calendar sponsorship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor McFarlane, did you wish to speak to this?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other councillor that wishes to speak to this motion, either in favour or against? No, there's no one else. Just giving you plenty of time. No, Councillor Howe, did you wish to close?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. I have had speakers, so we do need to put it to the vote with a show of hands. All those in favour? Yes, that is unanimous. Thank you, all councillors. Thank you very much. Before we move to the next item, we'll see if we can have one of the officers get Councillor White back into the virtual room, as it will.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, IT rendering some assistance to Councillor White. Be back shortly.
Thank you.
Check.
I did just check if that was locked or unlocked, and it is unlocked, so he can come back in.
There we go.
Councillor White, hello.
I'm back.
Welcome back. Councillor O'Callaghan back. Thank you. So all of us back in now. We move on. The next item on the agenda is 17.4, update of the Councillor Code of Conduct. I have a mover to this. Councillor Gibson is moving. Councillor Howe seconding. Any opposition? Councillor Gibson, do you wish to speak? Just might wait a minute, Councillor Gibson. We can see you moving, but we can't hear you at the moment, so might wait for I think before your turning camera off and turning back on again seemed to work. Just wait for Councillor Gibson to come back in. Here we are, we're back. Councillor Gibson. No, we don't have you. And understanding the frustration of us being all in remote locations, we haven't got anyone there to step in and help out. So we'll just persevere. We need to have all councillors seen, heard, and being able to hear all at one time, or else we'll just have to suspend the meeting and start again. But try now, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Middlemas, offering technical advice.
No, not at all. My understanding is we have to be able to see and hear the councillor. I can see Councillor Gibson quite well, see our members, etc. If she was to phone you and we could hear her on your phone, would that pass the act?
I think we did talk about that last month's meeting, and that was, I think Councillor O'Callaghan suggested that was the MacGyvering of internet, but did that pass the test?
Seen and heard appears to be the test.
There you go.
The other option, Mr. Mayor, is Councillor Gibson can dial into the meeting via phone as well. There's a phone number in the meeting invite.
All right.
Text it to Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, we might have to get you, sorry, Councillor Gibson, we might have to get you to dial in the number in the meeting invite. If you dial in your phone, it'll come up with a, we'll be able to hear you and we'll be able to see you at the same time. Councillor Minimus, I thought that might work as well, but it seemed to get a strange feedback loop in hearing.
I think that's because she had her microphone on her computer, so it'll pick it up that way, Dan. I think I had the same problem in a previous meeting.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, given that we've persisted with GoTo forever, despite the fact some of us suggested we not use it to start with, is there any possibility that there may be a matter of urgent business about us reverting to Zoom for the next meetings, just so we can actually get the meetings done?
And maybe a letter to the federal member for telecommunications around NBN in Councillor Gibson's patch.
And mine.
And yes, yours has always been a bit of a...
Oh, I can hear you now.
Oh, we can hear you. So we passed the test where we can see you, Councillor Gibson, and we can hear you via a phone hookup, which is great. It's the only way that we can get you to attend the meeting. So you are the mover.
I am. If I hadn't been the mover, we wouldn't have had this problem.
Well, we'd still have to have you being able to tick all those boxes. So,
all right.
Do you wish to speak?
Okay. Just really quickly, we had the Local Government Act change. So this is actually bringing our policy in line with that. And I'm not talking anymore because I don't want it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howe, you were a seconder. Do you wish to speak to this?
Mr. Mayor, what this new code will do is will any other previous versions will be revoked, and we will have to, as councillors, will sign the new copy. It will then go on our website and be available for inspection at our service centres. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Any other councillor wish to speak? No. All right. Councillor Gibson, do you wish to close?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. As we have had speakers, we do need to put this to the vote. So all those in favour of the motion before us, as all hands are all up, Yes, I can see them all very clearly. Thank you. Carried unanimously at 17.4. 17.5 is the next item on our agenda, is the tabling of the Assembly of Councillors. And I see Councillor Middlemas and Councillor McFarlane there. I don't think you two are going to argue over this, but I'll go Councillor Middlemas and then Councillor McFarlane as a seconder. Any opposition? Councillor Middlemas, do you wish to speak? Councillor McFarlane, do you wish to speak? Is any other councillor wish to speak? No, silence. As there have been no speakers and no opposition registered, that has been carried unanimously. That concludes the last bit of our business. The next item on our agenda is 18, which is urgent business. Is there anything that a councillor has in front of us? Councillor O'Callaghan, I see you waving, that is urgent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to seek consideration by the council to admit an item of urgent business that cannot be heard at the next meeting due to a deadline that will lapse tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan. Councillor Harriman, I see you waving. Is it a question or a seconder?
Very happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So what we're voting on at the moment is to enter this item into the agenda this evening to discuss. We're not actually debating the item itself, but we're moving to add it to urgent business. Councillor O'Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'd just like to speak very briefly to the matter to be admitted. This relates to the draft submission for the planning permit for the use and development of land for a solar energy facility at the corner of Fraser's Lane and Traralgon Maffra Road, Glengarry North. As councillors will be aware, we need to have a submission if we are to present one by tomorrow. So there is no possibility for us to hear this at another time, and there was no way for the officers to bring it to us any earlier due to the nature of the engagement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan. Councillor Harriman, did you wish to speak to this?
No, I think Councillor O'Callaghan has said it all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any councillor wish to speak to the inclusion of this as urgent business? No. No opposition. Councillor O'Callaghan, did you wish to close?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We have had speakers to understand it. All those in favour of including this in urgent business? Councillor White, thank you. Just into the centre of the screen. Those all hands are up. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Callaghan. We'll add this as urgent business. Councillor O'Callaghan.
So just proposing that the matter now be moved into the agenda, Mr. Mayor. So this was...
You're moving the item itself now. Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Harriman. Any opposition? Councillor O'Callaghan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as previously mentioned, planning permit application for the Fraser's Lane Traralgon Maffra Road facility. It's important to note that council is not the authorising body in relation to this application, so we're not required to reach a determination either to endorse or refuse this application. We have, however, undertaken a process of engagement, as we do with a broad range of planning matters under our authority and those where our community has a particular interest, and we're able to hear from community members in relation to this, and they were community members within the immediate vicinity of the project and some from further afield. We also have an obligation to our community to ensure that individual members are heard in relation to matters of significance as it comes to planning, and that the information gathered is directly from those individuals, not via third-party organisations that may carry a level of bias, and it doesn't have for us often that authentic and robust opportunity to explore questions and concerns. In keeping that in mind, we did have a consultation process in place and were able to engage directly with the community to ensure that councillors could ask questions, learn more from community members, but also understand very clearly what they saw as the benefits, potential opportunities, but also concerns in relation to this project. We're very happy to hear their perspectives on this proposal, but also to gather together some themes, issues and concerns that were raised, and also ensure that they are not only documented by us, but also provided to the Minister, who will have authority over this application, so that it's provided in a concise form and captured in a way that is reflective of the conversations we've had with community. So at this stage, it's the first of these delegated applications that go directly to the Minister. So we did have to develop a process to be able to hear submissions, but we also want to ensure that we're applying the minimum standards that we would regularly apply to a project of this scale and scope. And on the basis of that, there have been a number of matters raised for the Minister's consideration. In the event that these cannot be overcome or cannot be addressed through the inclusions of the planning permit, then Council would actually suggest that our submission then be considered and stand as an objection. So for us, there would be minimum standards we would apply around applications of this type. We don't believe that some of those have been met in the most basic of ways. And on that, in regard to that, if it can't be addressed, then we would actually stand as an objector. If they could, however, be addressed, we would not need to be considered an objector in relation to this. I'm sure my council colleagues will take the opportunity to speak to some of these in more detail, but some of the concerns raised with us related to noise, landscaping in relation to the site, and that was particularly around glint and glare from neighbouring properties and amenity of the space, bushfire risk, which I know Councillor Middlemiss feels very strongly about and will be able to address for us in a great deal of detail. The removal of productive agricultural land, and I know Councillor White feels quite passionately about this, but there were some submissions from community members in relation to the importance of maintaining a level of agricultural land within the municipality and the high value placed on this particular area of farming land. Traffic impacts, both during the build and once the project goes live, and also concerns around the impacts of surface water and the runoff and the impact that may have on neighbouring properties. Mr Mayor, that's all I have, and happy to hand over to my colleagues to speak further to this.
Thanks very much, Councillor O'Callaghan. Councillor Harriman, you were the seconder on this. Did you want to take the option to speak to this?
Yeah, if I can, Mr Mayor, I'd thank Councillor O'Callaghan for covering so much of the issues that she has. Just to bring up a couple of points, if I may, with relation to this going, not the council not being the responsible authority, it is the Minister for Planning. But I thought it was important, and I think all the councillors found it was important and was of great benefit to actually have a meeting with on this subject and to talk to a lot of the residents and a lot of the proponents and people in the area. And I think we've tried to address a couple of the issues that were raised there, in particular, the planting of trees which won't reach maturity until 5 years before the solar farm reaches its use-by date. I think the fact that some of the residents who spoke to council actually pointed out that originally they were told there would be mature or older trees planted, and it turned out we're going to have 100mm pots. I think that's a major issue, as Councillor O'Callaghan alluded to. I also think it was important that we've included in there that there be a fee or a fund set up to cover the remittance of the site when in 25 years' time when the solar farm reaches its use-by date. And I think this is going to become fairly important with a number of solar farms being proliferated throughout Victoria and no doubt throughout Latrobe City. I think it's important that we set the groundwork, and I think it's really important that we find the right spaces to actually put them and to make the environment suitable for them to go in, where the impact on local residents is minimal and is reduced as much as possible. And I think what's in this submission to the Minister for Planning does just that. And as Councillor O'Callaghan pointed out, unless those conditions are met, we'd like this submission to be considered an objection. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Middlemiss? Oops. There it is.
Oh, sorry, but I didn't realise I had control again. Look, I'll be very brief, Mr. Mayor, but the basis of this is if this application for the solar farm was before us as the body to make a decision, we would still be some way away from deciding it because there are so many unanswered questions. And the process, if it's before council, is we ask the questions. Is there a bushfire problem in that area? And as Councillor O'Callaghan said, there certainly is. In the last decade, I've seen 3 or 4 major bushfires in the hills just behind the site, which have turned into massive grass fires that run through the area each side of the current site. So there is a major bushfire risk there, yet I don't see anywhere we've been able to address that. The landscaping, both councillors have mentioned the landscaping. I think at this point, I would have to characterise that as a bit of a farce. So our officers would have gone back to the proponent and said, what's your realistic landscape plan, not what you're talking about at the moment. What have you done about bushfire risk? Have you assessed that? So we're in a position where we're saying to the minister, there's a lot that needs to be looked at in some detail here. And we've given the minister a list. And as Councillor O'Callaghan says, address that list and we might just be interested bystanders. But if the list isn't addressed properly, we may have to become objectors. So I think we need to apologise to our community for rushing this through, but the government virtually has given us a couple of days to form an opinion. We consulted with those for and against, and here it is. So as I say, very much unprepared because there are many questions there that simply haven't been answered yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor White.
Finally, sorry about that, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think that pretty much it's all been covered in terms of the comments that have been made by Councillor Callaghan and Councillor Elvis and Councillor Harriman for that matter as well. And I think that I just want to emphasise the importance of that aspect of it in terms of the remediation of the site once the project has come to its completion. And I suppose one of the key concerns for me is the reinstatement of the land if it does become eventually a solar farm site, and what happens to all the solar panels that are going to be completed their task, and how they're going to be disposed of. Well, it's important that there is this bond in place and that there is a remediation plan that makes sure that we don't get met with an eyesore when it's all over. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. Any other councillor wish to speak? No? Then Councillor O'Callaghan, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my colleagues have more than adequately covered a lot of the detail in relation to this, and I thank them for their comments. The community perspectives in relation to large-scale developments are important. It's important that the conditions are applied to projects and due consideration given to the impact of communities, both those proximate to the projects, but those who are further afield, because there are far-reaching effects of projects of this scale. If this matter was considered by council, as Councillor Middleton was able to describe to us in much broader detail, we would have applied the principles of these standards, and we would have highlighted strongly that a range of factors have either not been addressed or have not been fully addressed to the standard that would be expected by council. It's important to understand the council is open to developments of this type and scale when and where they are proposed and developed with the requisite level of detail and scrutiny that not only we would expect, but our community would also expect in terms of these projects. And we hope with the fullness of consideration by the Minister, there'll be a development of this type in consideration of the appropriateness of location, impact and opportunity, so that any development, whether this or others that are brought to market, are sustainable and appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Councillor Callaghan. This puts a close to the debate that we've had. It's time to put this motion to the vote as the urgent business that's been put before us. All those in favour? That is 9 hands that I can see raised. Thank you very much, councillors, for that. That is the end of closing of the urgent business. We now need to close this, come to an end here, and we need to put the meeting to the public closed. So I need someone to move that the meeting be closed to the public. I see Councillor Gibson and Councillor Middlemas there. I'll take them in that order if that's all right. Councillor Gibson, Councillor Middlemas. Anyone in opposition? No opposition. Any speakers? No speakers. Anyone else want to speak? No one wants to speak. We'll carry that unanimously and we call the meeting closed to the public. We'd like to thank everyone for joining and persisting with us through tonight. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you to the people who have joined us through public participation as well. And we bid you good night in the land of YouTube and online. Thank you very much, and thank you, councillors.
Can we take a break to try and sort that audio?